Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Dom and Vaughn. I'm Dom.
And I'm Vaughn. So, today we still have Blue Beetle on the brain. Got a bit more to say from our last video. For starters, I'm gonna be honest. When we went to watch that movie, I did not expect to enjoy it. I didn't think I was gonna enjoy it. And in the following few days, I think we both kind of have to amend the scores that we gave.
Yeah, agreed. I know that I gave it a very, very low score, but I would say that I would now score it more as a 7 out of 10 as a movie. And I would say, still about right about at a 7 as a Blue Beetle movie overall, I'd say now.
Now that doesn't mean a whole lot has changed. I still think the movie is very unoriginal. I've seen a lot of comparisons between Blue Beetle and Ant-Man. We already saw a bit of comparisons in the first act to Venom, as we mentioned. So I still don't think it's original. I don't really think it's nothing groundbreaking, but I still definitely think it's a cut above a lot of superhero content that's come before. And the main thing that has changed our minds is the day after we watched the movie, we looked up some comic book stuff about some of the concepts that they use, being Carapax and the OMAC. And we were very shocked to come to the realization that the Blue Beetle movie actually did, in our opinion, Carapax better than the comics, and the same thing with the OMAC.
Yep. Yeah, in the comics, it seems like Carapax is a little bit more of a Golden Age or Silver Age character that didn't really get much restoration over the years. That's kind of what my impression was when we were researching it. And then just comparing that to what we saw in the movie, just like, oh, definitely could have done a lot more with the character in the movie, but they definitely made him a lot more interesting.
They definitely did. And I think, didn't the OMAC not even really have anything to do with Blue Beetle or Carapax in the comics?
Nope, not at all. But having it tied in with this aspect of the DC universe makes a lot more sense than or at least than what I read online from the OMAC project.
Yeah, so
And I don't even remember what exactly the OMAC project is like made from. I know one of the iterations of it was made by Batman, but whatever the other one was, it was just too forgettable.
So credit where credit is due. Whoever came up with those ideas, who was on the production team of Blue Beetle, I salute you. I think those were some very solid changes, and I think that, with that in mind, I think this is a movie that definitely does more good than bad for the character of Blue Beetle, and I think that this movie expands upon the lore of Blue Beetle in a very adequate way.
Yep, I agree. I will still say the actual main villain of the movie, Victoria Cord, still very bland, weak, basic, average villain.
I think she is worse than Darren Cross, the villain of the first Ant-Man, but at least Blue Beetle has Carapax. I think Carapax is definitely cooler than Darren Cross, so
Yeah, I would say Darren Cross had a little bit more personality and drive compared to Victoria Cord. We could actually see from that Ant-Man movie why it is that he's doing it, even though he's completely wrong.
they at least gave him the slightest little bit of character, but Victoria Court is just evil businesswoman.
Yeah, and that's all we get, which doesn't give me anything to latch onto as an audience member, as a viewer.
No.
As a consumer, I am getting nothing from this character.
Still think the movie's predictable. Don't worry. I still think it's predictable too.
Oh, yeah.
But I have to give it a bit more credit. But the topic of today's video is more along the lines of us basically discussing different ideas that we have had in the past since the trailer dropped of what we would really look at a Blue Beetle movie looking like. So to start off, as I mentioned in the last video, we had a pretty long discussion after I had first seen the trailer, and that ended up with us planning out a rough draft-ish of a Blue Beetle trilogy. Now, for this particular trilogy, the perspective was basically doing it as a set of solo movies. So this is a version of Blue Beetle that doesn't really interact with the larger DC world, and the idea is just that he's in his own little world. So the ideas that we had come up with for that trilogy is that the first Blue Beetle movie would of course be his origin story and him getting the scarab, but not really so much him becoming a superhero, because the main threat of that movie would be the superpowered alien bounty hunter Lobo. Now, we had basically come to an understanding that, in our opinion, Lobo would be a pretty effective antagonist for Blue Beetle, and I think that he's an antagonist where the Scarab could even take full control, and that's still not going to solve the problem, because that was an issue that like we saw in the movie, was that if the Scarab just takes control, it'll pretty much solve any problem. Like they're not going to get defeated if Jaime just lets the Scarab take control. But I think with Lobo, that doesn't exactly solve your problem. So depending on how you really choose to go about that story and those fight interactions, you can do something really special with that. But then, obviously, this is connecting to the larger story because Lobo was hired by the Reach.
Yep, the
And-
ones that created the Scarab in the first place.
Yep. So then for the second movie would basically be the arrival of the Reach. And then the third movie would be full-blown invasion. Now, I don't really want to harp on this too much because this was, like I said, these three movies were just like conceptualized for about an hour, 2 hours, several months back, and we have better ideas for what this would really look like. But that was the initial set of ideas that we had, was to basically do that. Now, the reason why I don't think that works is because me personally, I think Blue Beetle is best when he's part of a larger world, and especially to do a story like a Reach invasion is just, I don't think that's a story that has any real place belonging with a solo Blue Beetle story. I think a Reach invasion has to exist within a larger world.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's hard for me to imagine Blue Beetle in just his own little world like Batman and the Dark Knight trilogy. It's very odd to me.
Yep. So then did you want to get into some of the other ideas that you've had?
Yes, at one point I was speaking with one of my other friends about the Blue Beetle movie and kind of those initial thoughts that we had for a more proper Blue Beetle trilogy. And what we ended up discussing was essentially a first movie where it wouldn't necessarily be a Blue Beetle movie, but depending on the way it's executed, it could be, where either Jaime is the protagonist and you have Green Lanterns as the antagonist, since the Green Lantern Corps is supposed to have a history with the Reach. I'm brain farting right now.
So the Green Lanterns, you could kind of, you have a bit of liberty with that idea. Basically, you can make the Green Lanterns the protagonist or Jaime the antagonist, or you could kind of like roll with both main perspectives. Like my main issue with that concept as a movie is that there is no real overarching antagonist, but I think that that kind of story would be fantastic for like a TV show or a comic book. I think that would be a very ideal way to bring Blue Beetle into the world of the other characters, but I don't think that it would be an effective movie in and of itself.
I do think it could be. I just know that in order for it to be, there are aspects of what that would look like that I just cannot see at the moment. Because, yeah, it could either be a Blue Beetle movie, essentially, with Green Lanterns as the antagonist, or just a Green Lanterns movie, story, whatever, where they see that there's suddenly this new scarab on Earth, which is a big red flag for them because of the history the Green Lantern Corps has with the Reach. And so then they must go find and apprehend it. But because the Scarab is the Scarab, it has these Reach protocols, it's going to be very defensive against the Green Lanterns and may even have Jaime strike first.
And the other idea that you had was that it would be the Green Lanterns that are responsible for the Scarab being off mode.
Yeah, because that's actually something that my friend pointed out to me the other day, is that apparently, at least one iteration in the comics, the Green Lanterns intercepted the Blue Beetle Scarab when it was on its way to Earth, and that's why it was off mode or not within proper Reach control when it landed on Earth. Because typically when the Scarab arrives on Earth, Jaime is able to have the majority of the control. The Scarab doesn't just take control
And
on its own.
I'm definitely not as big of a fan of that version. I definitely like it more if the Green Lanterns have something to do with it. And that's why I really think that they're perfect for that, them basically being the first other characters that Blue Beetle meets.
Hmm.
Because I'm not a big fan of the trope of, like, oh yeah, the super powerful alien weapon that was sent to Earth just happened to malfunction, but it only malfunctioned on Earth. The Reach sent out a bunch of Scarabs to other worlds. Those ones never malfunctioned. Only the ones sent to Earth malfunctioned.
Yeah, it's always much better when there's a legitimate reason for it. And
I did like the Young Justice approach too. What they had basically done in Young Justice was that it was earthly magic that put the Scarab off mode thousands of years ago.
yeah, I like that too. But I really like the idea of giving the Green Lanterns a much bigger role in relation to Blue Beetle. And I like the idea that it would be Hal Jordan and John Stewart that would be explaining to Jaime what the Reach are, what they've done in the past, and why this is something that they're treating so critically.
Exactly. And then from there, your concepts really branched off into team ups with the Justice League, but first more with the Green Lanterns as the Reach arrives on Earth and then the invasion comes.
Yep, because I imagine that, because to me, the way that Young Justice did the Reach was just so good, having them arrive as these benevolent, this benevolent group that wants to help the Earth. They're allying or partnering with these different corporations to make all these
Yeah, but
nice products for them or whatever.
that
I'm not saying
might
that
have
would be
to-
that exactly would be the right way to go, but something kind of along those lines to me would be interesting.
You could pull aspects of it, but you definitely can't do that same sort of thing
Yeah,
because
you can't do a direct translation.
the
'Cause
whole
it doesn't
thing
work.
the whole thing is contingent upon the light. Like the corporations that the Reach is partnered with is because of the connections they have with the light, which is basically the group of evil villains that are basically pulling all the strings in this story. And that's the whole reason why they're even able to really gain that position. Without allies with humans, the Reach isn't really capable of doing that. Now they could still, or at least they're not able to come in and immediately have all that. You know, they could try to build it up organically and that could work for them, but it wouldn't be the same sort of relationship with humanity that they had in Young Justice just because of the nature of that story.
Yeah, absolutely.
But so then with that, the final set of movies that we had, you know, there's obviously very, you know, similar trends with these trilogies. They're all going to end in some way with a Reach invasion, and I just think that that's the best way to really conclude Blue Beetle's of himself story before he basically just would become a character who's involved in other, you know, cosmic or high level threat stories within DC.
Yep.
But so we were talking earlier about the good things that this Blue Beetle movie, the one that actually came out, the good things that movie did for the lore. And it really has kind of, you know, made me change my way of thinking. Like I said, when I first saw the trailer, I thought the best way to go about it would be to do Lobo as the first movie. But now I'm okay with running the Carapax angle. I think you could do a good connection with it in Ted Cord, of course, just with the history. I don't really think that's a bad idea at all. So I think you could largely take what they did. I would just, you know, tweak a few things, me personally. And I think that would function very, very well as a first Blue Beetle movie.
Yeah, and I think it would actually be really good for that first Blue Beetle movie to actually, I don't know exactly in what way, but I think it would be much better for the first scene to actually show and include Ted Cord and like him working with the Scarab, at least like briefly as he makes his technology, and then suddenly you jump forward and he's gone. Victoria Cord or whoever suddenly is running Cord Industries or whatever it's called. And all of this stuff is happening now as a result of that. We don't know what happened to Ted Cord, but we at least have a better understanding of who this guy was.
I don't know if I would necessarily go with that angle, because I wouldn't really want him to be the first character introduced in the movie just for him to then disappear from the movie. Because then you know for a fact he's going to come back and there's not really any surprise tied up in it.
There was no surprise in it anyways for us.
Well, yeah, but I'm sure there's a better way to do it, but I'm not really interested in figuring that out right now.
Yeah.
Regardless, I think you could do the Carapax as the main villain first, and then transition from there to Lobo, and then after that, and then obviously, like, because in our version, the way we think things would be best is, of course, where Blue Beetle is operating within a world that includes other characters. Because I don't really like it when, oh yeah, this is a world that has all these different superheroes, but they never really help each other out. Like Marvel having a massive threat of 3 helicarriers that are about to gun down millions of people, but Tony Stark can't be bothered to show up. Captain America can't really call on anyone else except for Black Widow and some random guy he met while jogging.
Yep.
And it just so happened. Like, isn't that actually, sorry, quick side tangent. Isn't it just interesting that when Cap was on the run, he didn't go to Stark Tower, he went to some random guy he met while jogging's house? Isn't that a bit weird?
Yeah, it is.
Anyway, back to the subject. So I think that once you get to the second Blue Beetle movie, obviously doing Lobo for that one, that would be where you can slowly, bring in other characters. Lobo would be a great character to bring the Green Lanterns in. And if anything, with the first movie with Carapax, you could probably have the Green Lanterns cameo at the end of that.
Yep, I could say that.
To still have their influence there. So then the second movie could entail, Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart like helping Jaime out when Lobo gets the contract and arrives on Earth. And you could run a pretty cool angle with that. And then I think you would basically just end the solo or smaller scale stories there. And then from there, it's just the Reach Invasion is just a Justice League story that has a lot of emphasis on Blue Beetle, the same way that a modern-day Justice League story involving Darkseid would have some emphasis on Cyborg.
Yep.
So that kind of wraps up what I wanted to say on this topic. Did you have anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up the video?
Just that, all in all, I think that because I believe that they've set up this Blue Beetle movie to essentially be the first movie for James Gunn's DCU, but it seems much more like it's loosely potentially connected, like they're playing it very safe with it. But to me, before a Blue Beetle movie were to be released, you need to have a proper universe established first. And I know that for James Gunn's DCU, he's kind of just jumping right into the middle. That's his plan. But
Which I think is smart.
yeah, it is smart, but I think that there are other things that we need to see with the start of that first, and then get into Blue Beetle. Because to me, by the time you get to Blue Beetle, you need to have the core Justice League team all established, and they've been around for a while. To me, the Titans should also be established. Robin, Kid Flash, Aqualad, Speedy, Wonder Girl. And for them to have been around long enough that at this point now, the first Robin is now Nightwing.
Yeah, because I could also see Blue Beetle being someone who gets folded into the Teen Titans, but obviously that has to be the version of the Teen Titans that's farther down the road and is being led by Tim Drake, not by Dick Grayson, because
Exactly.
Dick Grayson leads a very particular team of Titans, and then Tim Drake would later on lead the new Teen Titans,
Yeah, and with that, of course, like I do very much imagine that Blue Beetle, over the course of a proper DC timeline, ends up very much elevated to a very high status. Like I imagine Nightwing ends up being at, the first protege of the Batman, supposed to be destined to lead the Justice League.
But anyway, that brings us to the end of this video. So tell me what you think about the ideas that we shared in this video in the comments down below. Part of the reason why we're doing this channel is we want to open ourselves up to feedback on our ideas and the way that we look at stories, the way that we think things should be done. I don't really want to sit here and say like, oh yeah, I know better than the professionals, even though most times I think I do. But I want to see what that looks like. So let me know what you guys think down below, and we will catch you on the next one. Make sure to like and subscribe too.